Okay, welcome. You're joining us for something pretty interesting today. We're taking a deep dive into a really personal journey. It's about Rhett McLaughlin.
Sorry.
Yeah, that from Rhett and Link. But we're not focusing on the comedy today. Instead, we're exploring how he wrestled with his uh, deeply held evangelical Christian faith when he really started looking at the scientific evidence for evolution and how that led to, well, a major shift in his beliefs. We're drawing this directly from an article where Rhett himself opens up about this whole experience.
Exactly. And our mission here, it isn't really to argue science versus faith or take sides. It's more about understanding the key moments for Rhett, the sort of internal struggle, the big questions that came up for him during this, well, really significant time. It's about looking at a human story, one that actually resonates with a lot of people when, cherished beliefs run up against challenging new information.
Okay, so let's set the stage a bit. Where was Rhett at, like, right after college? He mentions working as a civil engineer.
Yeah, that's right. Post-college, he was a civil engineer. But he and Link, they were also deeply involved with Campus Crusade for Christ. It's called Crusade now. Faith was a huge part of their lives back then.
And they had this idea, didn't they, about combining their faith with entertainment.
Oh, absolutely. That's a key piece here. Their ambition wasn't just, typical careers. They actually envisioned creating a kind of ministry through their comedy and videos. The idea was to sort of subtly evangelize. It really shows you how central their faith was to, well, everything they were aiming for.
Which makes his later shift even more striking, yeah. Now, he said he hadn't really dug deep into the whole science-faith debate until he came across Hugh Ross. Who was he, and what was his angle?
Right, Hugh Ross. He's an astronomer, and he pushes something called progressive creationism. So basically, he accepts that the universe is ancient, billions of years old, like science says. But, and this is the key part, he doesn't accept biological evolution from common ancestors. Instead, he proposes that God sort of stepped in at different times to create animals in batches.
Batches,
Yeah.
like distinct creation events over time.
Yeah, that's the idea. Not a gradual unfolding, but separate creations. And Rhett, initially, he found this kind of intriguing, maybe a way to square the circle, keep his faith, accept the old universe.
But something about it didn't quite sit right with him eventually.
Well, yeah. He started thinking about the logic of it, the batch creation idea. He kind of wondered, why would an all-powerful God do it that way? Like these sort of trial runs before getting to humans, it seemed, I guess, a bit inefficient or roundabout to him. A nagging question started.
Okay. And then came the big moment. The seismic shift, he calls it, triggered by a book.
Yes. Francis Collins' The Language of God, that was pivotal.
Francis Collins. Why was he so significant?
Well, think about it. Collins was and is a top-tier geneticist. He led the Human Genome Project. Huge credentials. But he's also a devout Christian. And in his book, he basically lays out how he sees evolution, the scientific evidence for it, as being completely compatible with his Christian faith. He saw the genome as God's language.
So it offered a potential path forward, a way to reconcile these things that seemed opposed.
Exactly. It showed Rhett that maybe you didn't have to choose. That maybe faith and accepting the science of evolution could coexist. It was a framework he hadn't really considered seriously before.
And it wasn't just the general idea, right? There were
No.
specific bits of scientific evidence in the book that really hit home for Rhett.
Oh, definitely. He mentions two things specifically that felt like, undeniable clues. First, the evidence from chromosomes. Humans have 46, chimps have 48. But the evidence strongly suggests our chromosome number 2 is actually a fusion of two chromosomes that are still separate in other apes. You can literally see the join marks, the leftover bits, in our DNA.
Wow. Okay. Like genetic archaeology.
Pretty much. And the second thing was shared retroviruses. These are like ancient viral infections that inserted their DNA into our ancestors' genomes. They're broken now, non-functional. But here's the kicker. Humans and chimps share the exact same broken retroviruses in the exact same spots in their DNA.
That sounds incredibly specific.
It is. The odds of that happening by chance are astronomically low. It's incredibly strong evidence for a shared ancestor. It's like finding identical typos in two students' papers copied from the same source.
So for Rhett, this wasn't just like an intellectual puzzle anymore. It hit him much deeper.
Oh, absolutely. Accepting common ancestry wasn't just changing his mind about science. It shook his whole understanding of reality, his spirituality, his identity. He talks about telling his wife, and there were tears. It was questioning the very foundation they'd built their lives on together.
That sounds incredibly difficult, confronting the idea that you might be fundamentally wrong about something so core.
Yeah, he mentions that vulnerability, the fear of being wrong about something so huge. It was a profound personal upheaval, not just an academic one.
And this realization, it also made him look differently at some of the religious sources he'd trusted before, the apologists.
Right. That was another big consequence. He felt disillusioned. These were people, apologists, who had confidently, dismissed evolution, often quite strongly. But now, seeing the evidence for himself and seeing someone like Collins show it could potentially be compatible with faith, he started asking, why were they so dismissive? Why hadn't they presented the whole picture?
So it wasn't just about evolution anymore, it started a wider questioning.
Exactly. He called it the first big domino to fall. If he felt misled or poorly informed about evolution, what else had he accepted without really scrutinizing it? It undermined his trust in those authorities.
It's really important to note, too, where this was all happening. He emphasizes this wasn't like a Hollywood influence thing.
Yes, that's a crucial piece of context he provides. This entire internal struggle, reading Collins, grappling with the evidence it was happening while he was still living in North Carolina, the Bible Belt. It wasn't about moving to LA and getting secularized. It was an internal journey driven by the information itself.
And he mentions feeling kind of isolated during that time.
Yeah, he talks about the loneliness. It wasn't easy finding people in his immediate circle who were asking the same questions or who he felt he could really open up to about these deep doubts. Even Link, his lifelong friend and partner, was apparently a bit hesitant initially to go down that road with him.
Okay, so accepting evolution, this wasn't the end of the questions, was it? It actually opened up a whole new set of, philosophical and theological problems for him.
Definitely. It wasn't a neat and tidy resolution. It raised some really deep fundamental questions, like the soul. If humans evolved gradually from non-human ancestors, when does a soul begin? Is there a sharp line? How does that work?
Yeah. The whole concept gets blurry.
Right. And related to that, what about the suffering of all those pre-human creatures over millions of years? If they didn't have souls in the traditional sense, does their pain matter theologically? And bigger picture, can the traditional Christian framework he grew up with, original sin, Adam and Eve as literal ancestors, truly mesh with the scientific story of human origins?
Those are huge questions. Did he find answers?
The article presents them more as ongoing points of contemplation for him, not necessarily things he landed on with definitive answers, but deep questions that arose directly from reconciling science with his previous framework.
So looking back at Rhett's journey as he lays it out here, what are the main things that stick out?
I think what really comes through is his genuine curiosity, his intellectual honesty. He wasn't afraid to follow the evidence where it seemed to lead, even though it was incredibly difficult personally, and the emotional courage, too, to face that possibility of being fundamentally wrong. It wasn't necessarily portrayed as losing faith in the article, but more like a shift, a profound one, from certainty to ongoing questioning and maybe a greater comfort with not having all the answers.
Yeah, moving from certainty to inquiry. And for everyone listening, Rhett's story, it kind of taps into a wider struggle, doesn't it? This tension many feel today between, deeply held spiritual beliefs and what science seems to be telling us about the world.
Absolutely. It's a very modern predicament in many ways. And it kind of leaves you thinking, doesn't it? If beliefs held so firmly for so long can be reevaluated, even shifted, when faced with new information or perspectives, well, it makes you wonder what other areas in our own understanding, maybe assumptions we hold, might be worth exploring a bit more deeply, questioning a bit more honestly.
A call for intellectual humility, perhaps.
Yeah, that. And just the value of staying curious, of continuing the pursuit of truth wherever it might take you. It's a powerful thought to end on.